Welcome to Freddy's Huge Ask Podcast. Huge lives and the stories behind them. And now here's your host, Freddy Cruz.
Critically acclaimed author of Rabbit Cake, Annie Hartnett is back with a new one titled Unlikely Animals. She joins the pod right now. Hello, Annie.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I do want to talk about Unlikely Animals because I blew through this one in an entire day. This is like one of those ignore the entire world type stories, but I got to know what led you down the path to becoming a writer, books, TV shows, what kind of music you were listening to, all that stuff.
To becoming a writer, I feel like it's most writers that I know, I think it's more common that they wanted to be writers from a young age. That was not the case with me. I wanted to be a cartoonist when I was a kid. A cartoonist or maybe a veterinarian. And I am very bad at math and science, so you can't be a veterinarian. But I was really into art for a long time. And then I had my high school art teacher told me, she taught me art all 4 years of high school. And then the final year she offered an AP art history class. So I took that and had to write papers for her. And she pulled me aside one day and said, Annie, I have to tell you, I know you like art and you want to be an artist, but you're a much better writer. And so that was kind of a slap in the face a little bit, but it did change the direction of my life. So I didn't major in art in college, but I didn't major in creative writing either at first. I majored in philosophy because I really liked sort of thinking about stuff in the abstract way that you do in philosophy. And I like to argue. So I got that from my father. But then my final semester of college, I had a visiting professor who had come over from Syracuse, who was just teaching for one semester at my small college, Hamilton College. And I wrote him a bunch of stories, and he also gave us a bunch of stories that were very weird, but also very literary, which I hadn't encountered in other classes. He gave us a George Saunders story, the Sea Oak story, that famous story, and he gave us some Amy Bender stories. And it was like blew my mind. I was like, if I could write stories that were like this, that are weird and fun, but also have sort of deep and really meaningful things to say, then why would I want to do anything else? And he said to me, you should go get an MFA. That I did have a certain level of talent that he saw. And I said, great, what's an MFA? So I had no idea of graduate level creative writing programs. And with weeks left in my senior year, I changed my minor to from environmental studies to creative writing. I had enough credits in English, so I was able to do that. Not that it really mattered, but that sort of set me on the path to being a writer. And then I did go get an MFA at the University of Alabama a couple of years later. And so once I was like a dog with a bone. Once I had it, I didn't let it go.
You're interested in art. So would you ever consider in the future maybe doing comics or writing and or illustrating a children's book with your talent for storytelling? So
I hadn't drawn for a long time after that. I kind of stopped. And I felt like, why would I if I had writing? And then I was working on this book up at McDowell in New Hampshire. And I had a month there, and they have all sorts of different kinds of artists. And Amy Kurzweil, who is a New Yorker cartoonist, was there when I was there. And I sat down to her at dinner one night, and I said, that's what you're a celebrity to me, first of all. And we grew up in the same town, so we had a couple mutual friends. But I said, if I could ever look over your shoulder just so I could see, what that other life could have been. And she is a very generous person. And she said, yeah, like we didn't really work after dinner. We'd work all day. And then after dinner, there were some people that were kind of done working and would socialize. And so she sat down with a bunch of us, including Jane Alexander, who's like that. She was in Kramer versus Kramer. Oscar nominated actress. And so like a group of really cool people sat down, and we learned to cartoon from Amy Kurzweil. And it was just like the coolest experience of my life. And I loved sort of what I learned from her, the sort of ink techniques. So I've kept up doing that as a part of my sort of creative process. And then as the book was finished, and it's a book set in a small town, we will talk about the book, but my editor said, we need a map for this book. Your agent said that you can draw. And I was like, well, oh my gosh, like I can't believe me. Random House would print something I drew. And so I was so excited and felt like I'd been gifted something. So I drew the map in the front of the book. And then for promoting the book, since I have been working on a new book, but I have a hard time working on a new book before I'm like emotionally done with a book, is what I'm kind of figuring out about myself. And so as I'm like waiting, all those months of waiting before your book comes out, and you have to ask people to pre-order books, which feels terrible because they don't get anything. It's like, here's money, and you don't get anything for a long time. So I said, well, I could make drawings for people. So I've said on Twitter, if you pre-order the book, the deal ended recently, but if you pre-order the book, I'll make you an animal drawing. So I've made over 400 animal drawings. So it's now part of my process. So I would someday like to write something where the drawings are more incorporated. But it's all kind of come together in a kind of cool way for this book.
Yeah, well, and that's something I also wanted to mention, because I did see all the really cute drawings you did on social media for your readers. And I mean, I think to call it a shtick is I don't know, I think of it as kind of pejorative, but it's the first thing to come to mind. I mean, you have
kind of a stick.
Yeah, you have it's like I don't even know what to call it, but I mean that in it's a complimentary way. It's like, oh, well, Annie's the author who draws original artwork for her fans. Isn't that cool? She has these really cool novels, but she's also giving back to her readers, which is not something that a lot of authors can do.
Well, I'm a really social person, and I really love touring for Rabbit Cake, and kind of got in my car and basically like sold books out of my trunk, or not really, because I had made a lot of bookstore friends. But I'm not able to do that now with a toddler at home and COVID in the world. So I'm not able to do many live events, and I'm like, I want to connect with people. And so it's actually been really social for me, and meaningful for me to hear from people who tell me about their dead dogs, or who tell me about why they're asking for a goose because it reminds them of their grandmother who was super loud. And so I'm just having all these small talk conversations that I haven't had for the past couple of years, because we are still talking to many people, but who are in like our inner circles. But small talk hasn't happened to me, at least, because I am pretty still isolated. So it's been really fun, and it's been more than a stick. But it did start out as a stick, and now it's this whole spiraled into something else.
Yeah, it's something that you're doing for it's like merch. You've got your own merch program. It's like an incentive kind of loyalty program, I guess would be like the better way to describe that. Now that I've had a second to kind of stew over it, but it also reminds me, it really reminds me also of one of my favorite writers in the world, Chuck Palahniuk, who pre-COVID would go out to auditoriums for book launches and throw out random things like stuffed animals. And he had talked about in a podcast interview about being in a store, and he noticed somebody in a coat, like a trench coat, if I remember correctly, and he was like, okay, this must be a reader. I guess I got to talk to him. Well, they eventually made contact, and then he was, as the story goes, the guy had mentioned that his brother had passed away, and he was depressed because his brother was his best friend in the whole wide world. But he also had this, on the same day as his brother's burial, this ticket to go to a signing with Chuck Palahniuk. And as he was standing in line for to get into the auditorium, they were passing out these stuffed animals, and the stuffed animal was a reminder to the guy that, you know, that things get better, was like the overlying the overarching theme of what he was saying was that there could still be things that delight you and surprise you. You know, I had no idea what to expect when I was going to go to this place, to the signing. And yeah, it's a really, really cool thing to do.
I love
It's a
that.
really cool way of engaging your readers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's, I think there are some other writers that have done like Jeff Vandermeer, I know a little bit, and he gets a lot. He has a PO box because he gets a lot of snail mail, and he writes everybody back. And I went out to dinner with him. I did like an event with him where I introduced him, and he invited me out to dinner afterwards. And also at the dinner were all of these people readers who he had stayed in touch with, including like, you know, younger people he said he'd known for 10 years since they've been reading his books, and they're sort of his pen pals, which is just really cool and kind of I don't know, it is sometimes I struggle with like what you're adding to the world creating art, but then you think about these connections between people, and then it's like, oh, okay, this does really matter.
Yeah, well, and because when I guess the pressure on, and I'm a writer as well, I'm indie, but I guess the pressure that is on anybody who does anything creative is that there are 7 billion people in the world. Now, our work is not going to reach all 7 billion people, but
Mhm.
you know, in your case, you'll reach tens of thousands. In my case, I might reach like tens of people, but you never know who is going to interpret how somebody is going to interpret what you write, or a
Mhm.
single sentence out of 378 pages that Annie writes in Unlikely Animals, how one person is going to interpret that one sentence, and it'll ruin their day, or it'll lift them up in a way that'll make them go out and like not be a jerk for the rest of the year or for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
But it's enormous pressure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I did have I did feel pressure with the first book. I didn't feel any pressure because I was writing it for myself, because I didn't have any sort of publishing hopes for it. I just didn't get that far in my brain. And then with this book, I was much more, you know, how do I make my people who liked rabbit cake happy? Or people who didn't like rabbit cake happy, which is even more overwhelming. And you can get kind of creatively stuck with reading feedback. And that happened to me for a little while. And then I had this, I met this bookseller, Hannah. I just like made her name into one word. Hannah Oliver Depp. And she owns Loyalty Books, and we just met at a conference, and she came up to me, and the first thing she said, I don't think she even introduced herself. She just said, I don't know what's wrong with your brain, but I loved your book. And that stuck with me because it's like exactly my sense of humor, someone who really got me from the start. And I could tell that she'd really read the book if she said something like that. And so as I'm wading through, like, you know, how do I interpret all this feedback? How do I make people happy? You can't make everyone happy. Not everyone's going to like your book. But I could write a book for that person, for Hannah, even though I didn't really know her, and now we're friendly, but we still have not met since then. So I almost thanked her in the acknowledgments, and now I wish I did. But I've thanked her many times over like DMs, because that was who I wrote a book for. It was like, I want someone to have that experience. It's like, I don't know what is wrong with this person, but they are entertaining me. And so that was kind of my mantra for as I was writing this book. And really all you need is one person who really says, this really affected me or entertained me, or you know, it doesn't need to be life-changing, but it impacted them somehow.
Yeah, and I guess that's like the struggle with creating something. In the synopsis, it's called a tragic comedy, but it's also it's dark humor. And
Mhm.
I, you craft now we're talking about Unlikely Animals for people who are listening. The previous book is Rabbit Cake, but in Unlikely Animals, I had found myself, cracking up because you go from these really sad, serious um, situations, and I'm like, whoa, yes, exactly. And then I kind of see myself in that because I'm a fan of dark humor.
Mhm.
And so I picture myself, I'm far from being in my upper 60, in my late 60s, but I can kind of see myself in the dad, in Clive.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, in that I'm going to be making my kids laugh their asses off when they're having to change my diaper, when they're having to shove, wheel me around in a wheelchair. So how hard, how easy was it for you to navigate the terrain of very serious issues, like, Clive, the dad, was obviously going through some mental issues, some dementia, I guess. How was that like for you? What was that like?
Yeah, so I think that it's the tone and the dark humor is something that I just can't resist as a writer. It's something that comes to, I have a very dry sense of humor. And sometimes I feel like what I like about writing is that in my family, I have a younger brother. I have two brothers, but the younger brother is like, he does stand-up comedy and he's just very in your face funny. And sometimes I feel like no one notices that, like, I'm the funny one. And so he's very funny, but it's a different sense of humor. And so I like writing because I feel like that's where my humor like really makes people notice it, rather than me in the corner, whispering some like little sarcastic comment. And so that comes across, that comes across in my writing every time I do it. I just can't resist it. It always ends up with like, that's where I go when I start writing something. And is how I feel about life in general. The people that I surround myself with, both with my family and my friends, is that I need, and I gravitate towards people who deal with the hard stuff with a sense of humor, and that is how we kind of carry on. And so people who take things too seriously, I have a hard time with relating to them, because I feel like the way, at my family funerals, there's always like big laughs, because that's sort of how we cope. And and so that always works itself into my work. And then, but the humor, I think that the place that I have grown to feel comfortable with the humor is that I had a conversation with my Rabbit Cake editor about this. And she said, what really I love most about your work and your humor is that you're never, ever mean. And that was kind of a simple thing to say, but as I was writing this book, and as it's kind of been something that has helped me writing anything, is to watch myself if I ever get mean, and to edit it out. And I think I am not a person who is really ever mean, but I can in early drafts sometimes show up as a little bit meaner. I write a joke, especially between the siblings, that's maybe a little too hard, like the knife hits too deep. Although that's one thing I love about siblings, that they say things that you wouldn't otherwise accept from a person, and because the love is there, it works. But or even something simple as like I'll name a character after someone I don't like. I always edit that out, even if it starts there, because I just never want the meanness to stay.
Oh my God, that is hilarious, because I had Stephen Hunter, who's a thriller writer, on the podcast, and he's talked about naming a Russian sniper after somebody who gave him a bad review in the press.
Oh, that's pretty funny.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, next novel you write, you should keep, if you name some character after somebody that you don't care for, you should just keep the name.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if someone really does something bad to me, that they'll show up in there.
Um, but so with Unlikely Animals, you lived at the start of the manuscript in the groundskeeper's house of a cemetery. What kinds of things did you see or experience that may have um, influenced the plot?
Yeah, so that was when I was really, really early in this book. So when I was in my MFA program in Alabama, I was working on my first book, Rabbit Cake, and it was my thesis project. And I had a professor who said, before you leave this program, I want you to start another book, because he sees people, struggle with that first book for years and then it's something that, it doesn't work out, or and he just sees people never write anything else. And so he said, put it aside for a couple of weeks and start something new. So I started this book, although it was a very different version of this book. It was focused on mostly just the fifth graders, who are a part of the book, but they're a more minor part. But so during that process, I had moved to Alabama. I'd moved to Tuscaloosa right after the tornado that had sort of torn up a big part of the town. It was like one of the big tornadoes. And so a lot of the graduate student housing was like all of a sudden gone. And so there was a house that was inside the cemetery. So you would drive inside the Williamson Cemetery gates, the iron gates, and turn, and the groundskeeper's house was right there. And this house hadn't been rented in a while, because it was really like gravestones were in your backyard. But with the tornado, and it was super cheap, my rent was $300 a month, split $900 split between three people. So I moved in with my big dog, and I loved it. It was just really a peaceful place to live, a great place to walk my dog. And what I love about cemeteries in Alabama, or in the South in general, which we don't do here in New England that much, is really, they get really decorated, and decorated for like the gravestones get really decorated for different holidays. And so there is, but what I think is very funny about this, and this is very darkly comic, is that at some point you stop decorating grandma's gravestone for every holiday, and nobody comes and cleans it up, so that there's every holiday all around the graveyard, and some of them are just like random holidays, like here's Mardi Gras, and here's St. Patrick's Day, and here's Valentine's Day, and here's Christmas. And so it's just every holiday at once in these cemeteries, or in the cemetery I lived in. And then what was really awful but funny is that I had this dog this was his backyard, and people leave like little stuffed animals, and so he would be like, a toy, another toy. And so I'd have to take the toy back, or the Beanie Baby back, and then try to be like, which grave did this belong to? But yeah, so that did show up in the book, because it is narrated by the cemetery in the town, or the residents of the cemetery in this small town.
Okay, and I want to ask you also about Ernest Harold Baynes, the real life Dr. Doolittle, and how you managed to weave in so flawlessly his real life story into his interactions with Clive.
Yeah, so the main character in the book, has the young woman Emma Starling, has come home to take care of her father Clive, who is suffering from a sort of mysterious brain disease that's sort of dementia, and it's sort of something else, but he's hallucinating, and he is hallucinating this ghost of this real life naturalist, Ernest Harold Baynes. And so I was working on that book that had fifth graders in it for a long time, but I had set it aside for many years. So I didn't really start working on this again, or really working on this book, until 2018, after Rabbit Cake had been out for about a year. And so I'm trying to work on it. It's not really going well. I was up visiting some friends in New Hampshire, Newport, New Hampshire, which is near Sunapee area. And we're driving along in this town. and it's go through a covered bridge and a pond, and it's just this forested area. There's not even many houses in this area, in that part of the town. And I'm looking up, and all of a sudden there's this huge, enormous yellow mansion that like falls out of the sky. Basically, it's on this hill, and it looks like the fanciest hotel you've ever seen. But it's in the middle of just like forest, and there's no trespassing signs all around it. So I'm like, this is private property. What is this place? So I Googled it, and it came up with, like, I Googled, enormous yellow mansion, and it's the only one in the area. And so it's like this Gilded Age millionaire who had moved up there after he retired, made his millions, moved back to his hometown, this Newport, New Hampshire, and built this mansion. And then I discovered that he bought up 60 farms and built a 26,000 acre hunting park where he shipped in animals from all over the world to fill this park. It spans 5 towns, and there were all sorts of animals in there at the time. And then I discover that it's still around, and it's owned by 25 anonymous millionaires who have it's sold out of the family after World War II. This robber baron's family, who was dead, but and then it's been privately owned since, and it's still there. It's still fenced in. The property is still used, and it's one of the people in the town said, like, it's like a black hole in their backyard. Nobody goes in. It's just this huge private property. And so I'm just obsessed, but I don't know how to write about it because I like dark humor. I like dark comedy. I like my characters to have cell phones. I don't really want to write historical fiction at all. But I always tell my students to follow their obsessions, and that'll lead to interesting places. So I'm like, okay, I'm obsessed. So I start going to the Historical Society in Newport, and then another one up north in Plainfield, and discover this guy, Ernest Harold Baynes, who was the naturalist for the park 1904 to his death. He died pretty early in 1925. And he was this real life Dr. Doolittle. He had animals living in his house. He had bear, deer, fox, lots of birds. Birds were kind of his thing. He had 2 tame bison, and he could just walk up to a skunk and pick it up, and nothing would happen. And like, never met this skunk before, not raised it from a baby or anything, but that was his talent. And so once I learned about him, he was just too irresistible. I was like, why didn't I know about this guy? Like, why isn't he the most famous man in America? And so he became a ghost. The father Clive was already dying in the manuscript, I think, because my father had a heart attack in 2016. So that was something I was sort of wrestling with in my own life, knowing that my dad, who's still alive now, but is not going to be around forever. So that there's like a lot of real emotion there. But so he started hallucinating, and he developed the friendship with the ghost. And then since Ernest Harold Baynes' writings are in the public domain, only recently, 2 years ago, I could work them in and use them. I mean, I also added to them and like I kind of collaged the writings, but a lot of the sentences or the wording is really his, and all the stories are real. Other than as I'm in the area making friends with the historians, I'm talking about him. People keep saying to me, he was such a womanizer. He was always at that art colony up the road, meeting women. And he writes all about his wife, who also lived with these animals, and as far as I could tell, had as much of a relationship with all the animals. So she doesn't get the credit for being gifted with it. But so she was at home taking care of wild animals, and he's down at the art colony with the female artists.
But he gets all the credit in the world for being this genius with animals and interacting with them in ways that you and I can only hope to interact with, and she's doing all the grunt work.
Yeah, well, I think
most of it. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, they had a maid named Lucy, who's a lot in the books, who takes care of the bear, but she is not. I had to edit her out because it's just like too many characters that are, and there are already a lot of characters that are from history but someone should, and they are welcome to now, write a real historical fiction of that Ernest Harold Baynes story, because there is way more than I could fit into a book that is, he's a main character, but there's a lot more into that guy's story, because he lived in a house with wild animals.
Yeah, well, and it makes sense too that he would be appearing in Clive's hallucinations, because Clive was a bit of a womanizer too, with 4 marriages and extramarital affairs and such.
Yeah, I mean, they have a lot in common. They have stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
And they're also, I think, men that are kind of larger than life people. So Ernest Harold Baynes apparently could give a speech to 400 children, no microphone, and everyone would be quiet, because he really was like sort of I always call him like a George Clooney mixed with Crocodile Dundee, that he was like he was also very handsome and but also had this super magnetic personality. Although some people didn't like him either, but the director of the Bronx Zoo, like, he had some quote about what a moron he was. But I'm sure. Well, does everyone like George Clooney? Probably. I was gonna say, like,
I'm sure you can find somebody out there that doesn't like him. I don't know. Maybe the head of ISIS hates his guts. Like, they hate us too. So
yeah,
maybe that's
somebody
a bad example.
Like Clooney, but
yeah. Well, okay. So someone I also wanted to ask you about will be Augie, who is the main character, Emma's brother. And Augie struggled with drugs. And one of my favorite parts of the book, and I hope this isn't a plot spoiler, I don't think it is. We can edit this part out if you'd like, but it's where he talks about Clive, the dad, camping out in his truck for 5 days outside the rehab center. So can you speak about the topic of addiction playing a role in the crafting of the plot?
Mm-hmm. Well, and Clive is camped outside the rehab center for 5 days in his truck, and he is also blasting Black Sabbath the whole time,
which is amazing.
Yeah. So men who are larger than life. Clive is a poetry professor who is also in a cover band, a Black Sabbath cover band, Blacker Sabbath. So he was always that larger than life character. And then I'm writing the brother, and I have 2 brothers, and they are both very dear to me in different ways. But the brother character kind of snuck up on me as sort of one of the like main hearts of the book. He was there in the parents' house, and I didn't really know why when I started writing the book. And then as I'm spending time in this real part of New Hampshire, and there is a real opioid problem in this real town, and so I just made him a character that had struggled with opioid addiction, and that he had gone to rehab a couple times, but I wasn't thinking about it too hard. And then as it was working itself more into the plot, I guess that's how I write everything. I do it, and then I think about it later. And so that became really part of his character as someone, the sister in the book is supposed to be this golden girl. And so he's supposed to have all this resentment to her because her life has worked out, from his perspective, the way that he thought it always would. And then she's come home kind of a failure. So they finally kind of have a little bit more common ground of being disappointed with their lives. But the book is so much about second chances, and also realizing that you're going to lose your parents someday. And this is kind of hard for me to say, because I think my child is going to be an only child. I feel like I'm pretty content with one. But when you are realizing that your parents are not going to be there forever, you realize, okay, who's left is your siblings. And so it became much more with a book that I knew was about a dad dying. Then it became a book about healing a very broken sibling relationship, or people that, one thing that's good about being an adult is getting to know your siblings at an adult level, and not just like, people who hog the bathroom, or who are always like, teasing your friends. And so that became a major theme in the book. And then I really wanted to have Clive, the father, at the end of his life, it become more obvious how, even though he is sort of a narcissist, in many ways, or is like kind of a pain in the ass a lot of the time to his kids, he does show up for them, and that they are learning to appreciate things that have, that they might have either resented or been embarrassed by in the past. And really the dad outside the rehab center, showing his love in a pretty almost inappropriate way. I'm sure the people who worked in this rehab center were pretty annoyed that they had to listen to Black Sabbath all day long, probably all night long too, because but showing up for his son as he's detoxing in this, this really difficult process. He's not allowed to really go inside and visit. So he just stays in his truck so his son knows he's there for him. And that's kind of the way that I like to write. I like to write about how people should figure out how to show up for each other, even in ways that are not the ways that we sort of expect or that we think that we want, but in ways that can be surprising and that can be really, really appreciated and meaningful. Even though Clive is also there and his wife doesn't know he's there. So she's panicked for 5 days because she doesn't know where her husband is when he's sleeping in his truck. So that scene and that sort of whole thread ended up meaning a lot to me. And I think that in some ways like became sort of the emotional part of the book, that what goes on between Emma, the sister, her brother, and then the father.
There is another passage that really blew me away, Annie, and that is the one about the dog dying of cancer, and it's the vet telling Emma as a little girl that not to be sad for her dog because the dog would absorb hers and her family's sadness. So the dog and this, it almost moved me to tears. Almost. The book is so entertaining that it kind of made it hard, but it was just so beautiful and sad. And I used to have 2 dogs. Now I have 1, but the dog in the novel is a border collie. Your real life dog, Mr. Wilson, or Willie Nelson, is a border collie. So I got to know about any parallels you have between that passage.
So the dog in the book is a Great Pyrenees mix, but he's a herding dog. But that's interesting that you thought that, because the dog in Rabbit Cake is a border collie. And I felt that I couldn't do 2 border collies because I have border collies.
Okay, I was getting mixed up. Sorry.
But it's a herding dog. It's okay. So I did want a herding dog because I do love herding dogs as their personalities. And also Moses is a little, I think, dopier than border collies typically are. The dog in Rabbit Cake, I feel like, is like a whole nother person. And Moses is also, he is smart, but he's got a little dopey, like big dog goofiness to him. But so that actually means a lot to me that you were affected by that and that you like that part. That when I was writing this book, and I had that sort of year after Rabbit Cake where I had a lot of trouble writing, it was both because I had, all the feedback and I was like trying to make people happy, but also my dog, who was like the love of my life, died of cancer. And I used to take him everywhere with me. And that was what the vet said to me, was like, he doesn't have long left, but you should try to act as normal as possible because he knows everything you feel. and that, so, try to live the remaining, it turned out to only be 12 days, but like, as he's going to absorb all your sadness. So like try, which is so hard because your heart is broken. And, but I think that there's sort of a good lesson there, is just to try to enjoy, even if you have 12 days left with a person or dog or whoever, like to try to enjoy every moment with them. So the dog in the book he is his own, the dog in Rabbit Cake is much more like, you could probably take my dog Harvey and put him right in that book, and that is the same dog. But Moses is not Willie. Willie is definitely goofier. So I have a new dog now, Willie Nelson, who is right over there, as he always is. And he is more, he does not have the intensity. And maybe this is why I had to pick a Great Pyrenees, because he is mixed with, he's a border collie, and he's mixed with something else, and he doesn't have the intensity of, border collies are so almost scary because they stare at you and they want things from you, and they just like, they're like, where's the sheep, where's the frisbee? That was with Harvey. And Willie almost has more of a like goofy lab personality, lap dog. He's just a lover, and even with, I have a 2.5-year-old who like chases him around the house and, does hit him once in a while. And it's just like, I could leave Willie. I just trust him. So, and we do not hit the dog, but, he's just such a good dog. And the dog in the book is such a good dog. And also I want to say, because the dog in this book does not die. He is a young dog, and he's going to have a long life. And I know people sometimes are cautious about reading books with dogs because often the dog dies. This book, the dog does not die, even though there is that line about dogs with cancer, because this is a family that has had a lot of dogs because the mother rescues dogs. But Moses, the dog, lives beyond the book.
Before we wrap up the interview, Annie, I want to do a kind of a lightning round. I would like to know who has a better grasp of mortality, New Englanders or Southerners?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm a New Englander, so, and I only lived in the South temporarily, so, but I think that's a tie. That's a tie.
Okay. I was gonna, and I thought about this because I was gonna ask you this question earlier in the interview, but then I thought I'm gonna wait and I'm gonna ask her in the lightning round okay, so my thought was, my prediction was going to be that you would say Southerners because you had talked about how and I'm in Texas, how we decorate for the different holidays. But I don't know. So
I think it's different. I'm definitely influenced by both. I'm really influenced by Southern writers and living in Alabama for the couple of years that I did. But then New England also has like all the witchy stuff and like, there's just the old gravestones and, I grew up in New England, and one of the things that I remember doing on field trips is going to Salem, Massachusetts, and doing grave rubbings with crayons. And so I can't really say that I didn't. And my mom is a and I am we are a very Boston family. My parents have never lived outside of that area. And my mom took me to cemeteries all growing up because that's where all the she's a bird watcher, and like warblers love Mount Auburn Cemetery in particular. It's like one of their stopping places on wherever they go. So I grew up like going to cemeteries all the time, and death was just kind of a part of my childhood in some ways. So I guess, who doesn't get death? I don't know. Do Midwesterners? They probably ignore death.
Maybe they do. Who knows? I just think it's fascinating because it's something that we all eventually go through. But particularly in the West, I think we just in what I've read and studied and watched on YouTube video, is that we in the West typically have a harder time coming to grips with our own mortality than those in Asia, or I guess even, I don't know, maybe South America.
Well, cultures that believe in reincarnation, that's the best. The best.
Yeah, you never die. You might come back as a tree or a cow.
Yeah, but you're gonna be something else. So I think if I had grown up in one of those cultures, I'd still be obsessed. I don't know.
Yeah. What's harder to write in a novel, the first sentence or the last sentence?
Oh, the first for me.
What is the funnest fun fact about Ernest Harold Baynes you learned while researching for Unlikely Animals?
Oh, I just love that his favorite creature in all the world was his fox, his pet fox, the Sprite. And I almost called the book The Creatures We Love the Most, because he said, that creature is the one that I love the most in all the world.
True or false? So many people don't know how redneck New Hampshire really is.
Well, that's true. I grew up I grew up in Massachusetts, but my grandparents had a house in New Hampshire, in Freedom, New Hampshire, which is what Freedom, Alabama is named after Freedom, New Hampshire. And so NASCAR is, which we would say is a redneck, pastime.
Annie said it, not me.
New Hampshire to me. That's New Hampshire to me. So, yeah, that's true.
You teach writing. What are 3 things aspiring writers need to know before writing their first manuscript?
Oh, stick to a routine, whatever it is. Doesn't need to be every day, but like make yourself a routine. Read a lot of other novels, or whatever if you're writing memoir, read a lot of whatever you read, whatever you're trying to write. And that, especially if you're writing a novel for the first time, that doing it badly is the floundering around is part of the process. So know that the first draft is going to be terrible.
This is Freddy's Huge Ask podcast. What would you like to ask me?
Oh, what tips do you have for writers?
You know what? I am a big fan of routines. I recommend writing longhand. So I've got 2 unpublished manuscripts, one of which I think I'm actually going to do something with. But ever since learning that Chuck Palahniuk, and this is the fanboy coming out of me, ever since learning that Chuck Palahniuk writes longhand, I started writing longhand, and I found it to be more engaging. I'm writing something that's nonfiction, and so I'm typing that out because I want to, I'm just typing it out. But as far as fiction goes, yeah, I find it to be more engaging. You get more involved and more just, I don't know, the characters seem to come to life a little more for me when writing. And plus I think it looks cool. Maybe it's the young athlete who was used to seeing his coaches scribble all over a piece of paper. I think it's awesome to have, to go back and look at, and here's,
you have good handwriting.
Look back at your chicken scratch and your arrows and your lines and your scratched out words and such. Yeah. I think it's I don't know. It's neat to go back and look like, I did that.
So you write it out longhand, and then when do you type it out?
I wait a few weeks and then I type it out.
So your handwriting is very clear. Okay. I have to really work to, I have pretty handwriting, but only if I am like stop and make myself do it. Gotcha. Otherwise, if I'm just like writing as fast as I'm thinking, it looks like I have to immediately, I like to do that too, because it does use a different part of your brain and really can unblock you. But I have to then, do that for an hour and then immediately go type it out.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, and what I've found too is that writing longhand is not something you want to do at 2 a.m. when you are starting to get a little groggy, because there have been times when I've wrapped up a chapter and I don't know what the hell I wrote.
Now, what does orange juice SpongeBob mean?
Yeah, and it looks like, well, I don't write in Cyrillic language. What the hell is that? Yeah, no. Cool. Well, this has been a just such a fun conversation. I really thank you for joining the podcast. Please, before we wrap up, where can my friends go to find out more about Annie Hartnett?
So anniehartnett.com, and then I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Annie_Hartnett. And yeah, you can email me through my website too, if you want to.
Outstanding. The new book is Unlikely Animals. You also want to get the first one too. That is Rabbit Cake. Get them both. Knock them out an entire weekend. Annie, thank you so much for coming by the podcast.
Thank you so much. This has been really fun, and I really appreciate it.